Steve, please go ahead with the agenda. And you're on mute.
Of course I am. Welcome, everyone. Appreciate you taking the time to be here today. We got a lot to go through, but I do want to. Is there anybody new that has not been on this call before? All right, looks like everyone's been here before. Okay, good. As Samina mentioned, I did a 30-minute or so review of the work that our TC has accomplished so far. And when you actually look back at all the things that we've collectively done, it's actually been quite a lot in the 5 months or so since this TC has been active. So I kind of reviewed a little bit about some of the progress that we've made, all the different features that we've collectively looked at, and with respect to this TC, including things like cryptography, bill of materials, and some of the enhancements to AI that for environmental concerns, and all the other features that kind of we collectively reviewed. I probably went a little too technical during the talk. I should have kept it a little bit more high level, but overall, I think it went very well. There was some really good questions at the end, especially around CBOM, and so I thought that was encouraging. But yeah, overall, I think it was well received, and that's all because of the fine work that we've collectively done. So thank you for that. With that in mind, I've got two proposals. These are not, I'm not going to decide on these today. I just want a group to start reviewing these things, which is why they're on the agenda today. But there's a scope and program of work for TG1, which is the Transparency Exchange API working task group. So please take a look at this in your off time and provide some feedback. I've made sure that in terms of sharing, that anybody has the ability to comment, and many of you also have the ability to directly edit this document. So please review it. I will like to bring this up at a future TC to get these task groups started. So this is the one for the Transparency Exchange API. And then we've got another one for TG2. I need to review this with Philippe yet. I'm hopefully meeting with him either tomorrow or sometime early next week. So he's very excited to get going. Unfortunately, it's just kind of a busy week for him. But yeah, there's TG2 is package URL. Now, if we adopt any other kinds of relevant standards, then we could potentially make a TG3 and so forth. For the package URL, I think the Transparency Exchange one is fairly self-describing. For the Perl one, however, this one might need a little bit more thought, because we've got two specifications, etc. Essentially, we've got Perl and we've got VERS, and then we've got all the work that's related to Perl types. And I think that is worthy of a little bit more discussion on how we're going to handle that. Ian, you've got your hand up.
No, my question was kind of superfluous, but for Philippe, what's his representation within the technical committee? Is he considered, I think it's a non-member technical advisor, or is he joining as a member? I just want to make sure he still has his hands on all this stuff.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we'll have to invite him as an expert, I believe it is.
Okay.
Correct.
Yeah.
We will have to invite him as an invited expert, and I can provide that form for him to fill out. Thanks.
So yeah, so I'll add that as a comment, but I think whoever the other key players are in package URL, I know you're one of them, Steve. It'd be great to make sure that they are all included on this. So
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll try to get as big of a you know, because Pearl has a you know, it's spec independent, right? I mean, Pearl kind of spans all of it, and even outside the whole SBOM thing, right? So Pearl's much bigger than just software transparency. So yeah, I think it's I think it's on us to provide or to get as much people actively involved as possible. So please take a look at both of these over the next week, and I'd like to review these in a little bit more detail next week, if possible. That way we can start getting these TGs actually formed.
So a related question, but maybe not to the scope documents. Since, for instance, in the transparency exchange, we're starting a lot of new work, would it make sense to have that? We discussed earlier a disclaimer for the work to make sure that we have no problems when we move that into Ecma. Since it's a lot of new work, we could do that early on instead of trying to repair things afterwards.
Yes.
And
Yeah,
maybe
royalty-free.
we need to do the same with package URL, but there we have a significant amount of work, but it's traceable in GitHub.
Yes.
But I think for transparency exchange API, we need to consider making that part of the process. When you join the meetings, you accept this, blah blah blah.
Right.
Disclaimer.
Is Daniel on the phone? Let's see.
He was
is
here.
not. I thought he was too, but I don't see him. Okay. Yeah, I'll sync up with Daniel later, but yeah, I think you're right. I mean, we want to get, we don't want to have to backtrack because this is a lot of new work, as you said. So,
yep.
And then for, like you said, for Pearl, right, it's all traceable, right? Obviously, it all originates from Philippe, but everything else is completely traceable. So that shouldn't be an issue either. All right, so if you could take a look at the both of these draft scopes and programs of work over the next week, so we can kind of dive into these next week and hopefully finalize them. Let's see. I want to share before we dive back into the specification itself. I do want to share, if I can find it. I do want to share the new sections that were added to the document recently that are requirements of Ecma standards. There were sections that we did not have, and why will Word not let me resize this window? Okay, I guess I can't resize this document. Oh, well, I guess Word is broken.
Do you want me to share it?
Hold on, let me see here. Word
Don't force the lady to do that one-handed.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. Okay. This is it. Can I resize? Oh, now I can actually resize. Okay. How do you get it off of dark mode for this? This is just not worthy of dark mode. Okay, there we go. Share. And this is it. Okay. So there was a couple sections that we were missing. The first section is the scope of what is it that this standard document, what is it that's what is the scope of this thing? What is it that we're describing? So very simply, the standard defines the CycloneDX 1.6 bill of materials specification. The other section that we are missing, there's 4 sections that we are missing, is conformance. Now, conformance, I have broken down. I actually saw a another Ecma standard that I've kind of been using as a little bit of inspiration It is,
That's a very nice way instead of saying stealing from.
yeah, exactly. But there was another ECMA standard, I think it's 388, that I was able to, take a lot of this text from. But basically, this is your standard RFC 2119 type of statement. But then you also have the implementation conformance as well. And so, the requirements terminology, I think many of us have seen these words or words really, really close to this in other standards work that we've probably done. But the implementation conformance, I think, was really interesting. It essentially really boils down to, if you read through it, you in order to be conformant, you basically need to adopt the entire specification. Essentially, is what it comes down to. So they
That's
actually broke it down into
interesting because we have the CISA minimum SBOM requirements, but that wouldn't be specification compliant if we only parsed and understood those items then.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. So you've got consumer and producer, producing the SBOM versus consuming the SBOM. So I'm gonna put this text, I'm gonna put this document into the TC54 channel right after this call.
Okay.
So that you can read through this text, and please let me know if there's anything that this group disagrees with. And again, like next week, we're going to spend a little bit more time reviewing the TG or the task group papers, going through them one by one. And I'm going to give everyone a week to kind of absorb this, collect their thoughts. And again, we will review all of this text next week as well. All right. So we'll give everyone a week to kind of absorb all this brand new content that you haven't seen before. And we'll review all the documents next week. The third section that we were missing was the references.
You mind if I interject for a second?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm still on my first cup of coffee. Okay, Ollie, I didn't quite understand what the interchange that just happened about the minimum fields and how that would be not.
No, I think we were wrong, because when I read it again, this was the first time I see this, that an SBOM that only covers the CISA minimum requirements on SBOM seems to be compliant here, because you can do a subset, but you can't do a superset. You can't extend it with your own proprietary Edwina extensions to CycloneDX unless those extensions are within the spec allowed.
Right.
Right.
Which we do for XML, and we've got, JSON properties, for example.
Yeah.
The third section that we were missing was the references. There's obviously, this entire spec, for the most part, is based on JSON. So obviously this is really important to us. But other things that are kind of important and, are spread throughout the entirety of the standard are timestamps, URIs, both the, non-international and the international variants of URIs, as well as the CDX registered namespace from IANA, right? Because BombLink. So all these things are very, very relevant. And
we also have the SPDX identifiers, which is on.
That's a great point. All right, we should add
so
that.
I think we'll find others as we move along, but this is really good.
Yeah. So those types of comments.
We have an ID, like a number on these, so we can reference them by number in the text, or?
I was just looking at the existing ECMA standards, and this is kind of the format that they used, but we can create our own, I'm
so used to RFCs, and then we have our reference list at the end with numbers, and we refer to them by name and number.
Okay, okay.
But
The
I don't know.
final section was terms and definitions.
Fun.
Again, I was kind of eyeballing what I thought should probably be in here that may not necessarily be obvious, but if Cyclone uses terms that we think we should define, this would be the place to do it.
But we have to be careful because some of the things we actually define within the standard, in the standard
Correct.
text, and we don't want to define the standard twice.
Correct.
So
Exactly.
we have to be a bit careful here so we don't add too much and suddenly have some double reference.
Exactly.
I think it's fine to have some definitions in a central definition part and some definitions interspersed in the rest of the text.
Exactly. But if we add this definitions in two places, the risk is that we end up with two different explanations of the same thing, and that's usually very bad.
Especially if they get out of sync, right? Over time.
I'm not saying on video that I'm talking by experience. I'm not. I'm not.
I was going to say, one way I've seen this work well to have some be in the definitions itself and some in a separate container is for words that are industry specific, but not officially like defined in the document as part of the document's content, like a general glossary, you can put those in one spot. And then ones that are like CycloneDX specific content definitions, I think should go in the text itself. If this I'm making there makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's like publisher we have here. We have a definition, a strict definition of publisher within the spec. So it's kind of
I would
strange
move
to have it here. Just as an example.
Sure.
Yeah, like I said, these are not written in stone. So I wanted to give the text that I had to quickly, I mean, like within less than half a day, quickly come up with in order to get it ready in time for yesterday's call. But this is not written in stone. This was like from the seat of my pants, quite literally. Yeah. So this group needs
good work. Let's get the stuff into the process.
Exactly. So I will post this in the TC54 Slack channel after the call. And then again, please review these 4 sections before next week's call so we can kind of flush out and correct any kind of things that are in here. Okay. Let me switch gears and go back to, I guess, the specification, right? If I can find that, here we are.
Philippe sends his apologies for not being able to join today in the Slack.
What's up?
Philippe Ombredam sends his apologies for not being able to join today.
Yeah, he just pinged me too. Yeah. Okay. Looks like I'm gonna meet him with him on Friday, so tomorrow. So that's good. Awesome. Okay, good. Yeah, I'm gonna review the scope and program of work for package URL with him. And Samina, quick question. Do the chair and vice chair of task groups need to be Ecma member organizations or not?
Yes, ideally for the task groups, you also want your chairs and vice chairs to be Ecma members. If you are limited in that, at least please make sure that your chairs are Ecma members.
Got it. Okay. All right. Fair enough. Thank you. All right, I think we left off on this page here. So we are still working on the component object. A component can have copyright notice. This is the assertion of the copyright, not the evidence of copyrights. The evidence is later on in the specification. So this is fairly self-explanatory. CPE, this is the assertion of the identity. Obviously, a piece of software or hardware can only really have a single identity. And this is kind of that assertion. So we can assert the identity of of this thing via CPE. We can assert the identity of this component via Perl. We can assert the identity of the component with an Omnivore ID, the artifact ID. And we can assert the identity of the software with the software heritage persistence identifier as well. And finally, we can assert the identity via a SWID tag. For SWID, these are the fields essentially within SWID that we natively support. And then you can also optionally inline, this is a tag version patch, you can optionally inline the entire SWID document itself. So you could theoretically base64 encode the entire SWID file and stuff it into that part of the SWID SWID element. Okay. Modified. So modified is now deprecated. Modified was a way to describe something that was maybe forked. It was not maybe the origin component, right? It's maybe a derivative. This has been replaced with pedigree, which not only describes the relationship, for example, the ancestors, descendants, and variants, but you can also describe the commits and patches that make this variant unique. So, for example, if I forked, I don't know, some library like log4j, right? If I made Acme log4j, right? Well, I can describe that I have Acme log4j. It's derivative from log4j, and then I can describe my changes, including a bunch of other things like, you know, what CVEs it might have resolved, what enhancements or defects that I might have fixed in the process.
But we'll say more useful common example would be Linux packaging. They commonly have patches and backports and other things.
Yes.
So to get that description in here would be very useful.
Okay. So possibly, is Jan on the call? I don't see Jan. Oh yeah, he is. Jan, can you make a note of that? Make a note to maybe provide some examples of this. Ole suggested, you know, Linux packages, right? Because every Linux distribution, right, basically takes an upstream and modifies it some way. That's basically their business model. Yep. The other really common example is machine learning, right? It's generally too expensive to create a base model. So most organizations take some kind of foundational model and build on top of that.
Yep.
Excuse me. Okay, so within ancestors, descendants, and variants, these are basically just all components. So you can describe what those components are. And for each one of these things, it tells you just to refer to the definition of components. Again, you know, just saying that you're derived from something, well, that's useful, but how is it different, right? This is where the commits come into play. So you can describe the URL to the commit itself, who authored it, the committer, the message of the commit. So you can independently verify this stuff if you have access to the version control system. The author is just the individual, again, the name, email, etc. Timestamp of when it occurred.
Just a question on the commit. Would it make sense to have a note whether the commit was signed or not?
That would be a good enhancement request. Yeah, we could theoretically add that. I don't see why not.
Okay, we'll take that back to the.
Yep. Yeah, go ahead and create a GitHub issue for that. I think that would be a good enhancement and not overly difficult to do. Who the committer is, again, name and email, timestamp of when it occurred, committer name and email. Let's see what the message of the commit was. You can also provide the patches. So this is basically the diff, right? So you could theoretically, maybe, for example, you don't necessarily have access to the version control system or whatnot. Well, you can still provide the actual diff, which describes specifically what changed between individual files if you wanted to go to that level of granularity. For type, you've got unofficial, monkey patch, backport, and cherry picked. If there's additional types that are that folks would like to see, again, put that in an enhancement request. The diff itself, again, this is kind of inline, so you can provide the entire text of the diff in line and optionally base64 encode that. Let's see. And then what does the patch do, or what does the patch do? Well, in this particular case, it resolves something. In the case of a resolve, so it resolves some kind of issue. And issue has a type, and we're going to get to type in just a minute. Obviously, identifier, name, description, the source of where the issue is documented. For example, maybe your GitHub issue tracker or Jira, whatever, and then any additional references to other information regarding that diff or that patch. The issue type is either a defect, enhancement, or security. So think about maybe like that log4j example, right? You can describe that maybe you were using the old version of log4j, the one that was no longer supported. It was end of life, version 1.x, right? And it was vulnerable and it was not going to be fixed. Well, you could theoretically say that you're using that component, that you've forked it. Here are specifically the diff that I did to change it. And this is what CVE that I've resolved as a result of this diff, right? So you can kind of connect all these different pieces together. So this is just the identifier. This typically is going to be the ID that's used in the issue tracker, right? This is your Jira ID or your GitHub issue ID, the name of the issue, description of the issue, the source. So this is basically just the URL, right? This is your GitHub tracker, etc. Let's see, the name of the source. Let's see the URL. And then, of course, any additional references, right? If maybe a security researcher, provided a blog or whatever, that those kind of references would go here, right? We have a notes section. This notes section actually predates our support for annotations. If we were to do this again, we would have annotations here instead of notes, because the annotation support in Cyclone is better than just a single text field. But this is currently what we have in place. If people would like to see annotations here, again, an issue in the specification repo would be great. All right, we're done with pedigree. Now for every component, you can also define an external reference. Now, external references are interesting. They're really only external to the thing that the bomb is describing. So this description must be old, because this was changed, I believe. Yeah. All right. So external references are really only applicable to the things outside of the component. They can, in fact, be in the BOM because BOM link is a thing. Do we talk about external references here? No. Okay. I guess we talk about them later. So we'll get to that in a little bit, I guess. Components can have other components inside them. So think about a scenario where you have maybe an automobile, and then within the automobile you have a dashboard component, and within the dashboard component you have an instrument cluster component, and then within the instrument cluster component you have a speedometer component, and within the speedometer component you have things like plexiglass and LEDs and resistors and these types of things, right? Well, that exploded component assembly is something that CycloneDX can represent, right? So these nested kind of relationships. So that's what components can be within other components. That's kind of what that provides. In the case of software, yeah.
You might be about to jump in, but especially just in the text that you were giving there, that exposition, is the spec wanting to give any guidance on how people like choose to split up the turtles all the way down? Or is it like a choose your own adventure?
We have an authoritative guide to SBOM that actually does talk about that, how you can break these things up and essentially have, a BOM that references all these other BOMs, right? Or the ability to kind of include everything all in one thing. Either way is correct. That kind of guidance, however, is generally outside of the scope of a standard. But we do have an authoritative guide to SBOM that I would highly suggest, if you haven't taken a look at it yet, highly suggest taking a look at, because it does talk about some of those things. And if we're missing anything, it'd be really good to know.
Yeah, I'm particularly thinking just for any efforts to attempt to automate this, like tools will have to make opinions, and so trying to align with at least the spirit of the spec, to the extent possible, is helpful.
Yep. Awesome.
So the guide is the best current practice, and the spec is not, right?
Well, the spec provides no guidance. Let's put it that way.
No.
The spec is a specification. That's all it is. Right.
Dry specification.
You got it. The only commentary in the spec is really the first couple sections, which again were kind of derivatives from the guide itself, where we talk about the object model and some of the philosophy about CycloneDX. That's really the only commentary that's part of the spec. Once we get into the nuts and bolts, there's no commentary in here.
No.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. I guess part of the reason I ask, and I understand this is just a specification, that especially if you're looking at that nested set of SBOMs, like there is, I think, a somewhat obvious benefit if everybody chooses to like split up their components in a standardized kind of way. And so that's why I mention it. If everybody does something different, then the specification can remain consistent, but the way it ends up being used wouldn't be.
I think it depends, right? It depends on the use case, right? If you've got different components from different manufacturers and whatnot, I think it makes a ton of sense to break them up, right? However, the reason why we actually did the nesting, because nesting generally isn't really popular, right? In specification development, you typically want to try to avoid nesting if possible, because you kind of end up with the potential for endless loops. The reality, however, is that a lot of these things are going to be from single or small number of manufacturers. And what you can do is you can digitally sign every single level of that assembly, which is something that you just can't do if you are making things modular, right? You can assign each individual one independently, but you can't sign the collective thing, which is kind of a if that's a use case that you need, then making it modular like that is not going to work for you. So the guide kind of goes into, I think, a little bit of that nuance.
Yeah, fair enough. Appreciate it.
Yep. Let's see. Evidence. Okay. So we've talked a lot about, actually, really the assertions of things, right? This is this component. This is this is its name, this is its version, this is its Perl, etc. This is its license. We haven't really talked about evidence. Evidence is not an assertion. It's just, here's what I found, which is a very, very different thing. And we can find a lot of different types of evidence, right? We can we can capture evidence of the component identity. We can come up with different occurrences of maybe the same component in different parts of the application. We can provide evidence of call stacks. We can provide evidence of licenses and copyrights. So let's dive into the evidence of identity. So the evidence of identity basically has, and you can have an array of this. You have essentially a field, a confidence, a concluded value, the methods used to extract or analyze that evidence, and then the tools used to perform that, that evidence, the extraction or analysis. Oops. Let's see. The field, let's see. Oops. Okay, wait, where am I? Okay. The field can either be one of these things. So obviously you can do coordinates with group name version. You can do Perl, CPE, Omnibore ID, software heritage ID, SWID, or hash. The confidence of this particular piece of evidence. This is subjective, right? It could vary. The authoritative guide to SBOM does provide some guidance on, based on the types of tools and techniques used, these are the recommended ranges that you use, right? But we keep that out of the specification.
Okay, sorry. It says 0, nitpicking here, but it says 0 to 1. Is there a decimal involved, and what character do we use for decimal sign? Or is it just 0 or 1?
No, it's 0 through 1. So it is a number. So it is not an integer. So it's 0.1, for example.
Yeah, but it's a point and not a comma.
According to JSON
in Sweden,
schema,
we use
yes.
okay.
Yeah.
Oh, JSON schema is the reference here.
Yeah, that's an example JSON schema type. Yeah.
We have the concluded value. So this is kind of what we are saying we think that this value is based on all the other evidence. We have the methods, and the methods include an array of techniques, confidence, and values. The techniques that we can describe are here. So we can say, well, I think last week or the week before, I gave an example of, maybe having a Java artifact, a jar or Java class, for example, that we are extracting the Omnibore artifact ID from, right? Because the artifact ID was embedded in that artifact. Well, we could say the technique involved was binary analysis, right? Because that's kind of what I use to do that. If there's other techniques that we want to support in the future, this is just a simple enumeration of things, so we can add additional techniques in the future. Now, each method actually has independent confidence. So the first confidence we looked at was the the collective confidence. This is the confidence of this particular technique used, which could be different. For example, I could just be doing, I could be doing like a file name. Well, that probably is a low confidence thing, right? Because I could change the name of, libSSL.so to log4j, right? If I'm only analyzing the file name, I would think that it's log4j, but it's not. So that would be a low confidence type of analysis versus maybe AST fingerprinting, which would be a higher confidence type of analysis. But each method can have independent confidence, and you can describe the value that was derived from each method used. These are the list of tools that were used in the extraction. So for example, the thing that performed the file name scanning, or the thing that performed the AST fingerprinting, for example. You can describe what those tools are, and we use obviously the tools array for this. Let's see. Why is this repeating? I don't know why this is repeating. This must be a defect in my generation thing. So John, can you make a note of this? I'm getting yeah, I'm getting repeats for this, and I don't know why.
Methods of identity evidence, right?
Yeah. So I need to revisit my logic. I've got some kind of issue here. Yes, for some reason it's in there twice, and I don't know why. Okay. Moving on to occurrences. So this really is the idea that you can represent a single component. Say, for example, I've got jQuery, and maybe I'm not using any kind of package manager. And unfortunately, I might have, an application where I've actually got jQuery, 3.whatever.js on the file system in multiple places. It's the exact same file. So instead of, creating multiple components for that exact same thing, what you can do is you can describe just one component, and you can say, well, it exists in these different places. So that way you can say, hey, this jQuery X, it has these hashes, it has this Perl, but it's found at, multiple locations on the file system. The occurrences can have a location. They can have a line number, an offset, as well as a symbol, because there are occasions where, say, for example, you might actually have a component that has multiple occurrences in firmware, for example, or some other type of thing where you actually have to reference line numbers. So that's all supported. Let's see. That's an integer. Offset's an integer. Symbol's a string. Okay, that's just a text field for additional context. Call stack. So in a lot of cases, right, we all know that including a vulnerable component in a, as a dependency of an application does not necessarily mean that that component is going to be exploitable in the context of that application, right? I mean, the stats say upwards of 90% are not going to be. This is actually a way to describe those call stacks and whether or not something is or is not exploitable, right? So this can kind of fit into to Vex. Say, for example, if you wanted to say something is not in the call stack, not reachable, I believe the analysis decision is, well, you could actually provide evidence.
Did we just lose Steve? Okay, you're back.
Oh, did you lose me? I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. You were frozen
we lost you
for a while.
about,
okay,
maybe
okay.
15, 30 seconds.
Oh, okay, okay. If you're familiar with call stacks, this should probably be fairly familiar to you. So we did not reinvent the wheel here. We used terminology and descriptions that pretty much the industry already uses. Everything is kind of divided up into frames. Within a frame, we have the package. We have the module, function, and parameters going to that function. We have the line and column number as well as the file name. So nothing out of the ordinary here. All of these, I believe, are going to be strings for the most part. Function. So this is the method or function that you're actually calling. This is the parameters that you're passing to that method or function. The line number, the column number, the full file name, all strings, except for obviously the line and column, those are integers. License evidence. So we talked a little bit earlier about how CycloneDX can assert, here are the declared licenses, and here are the concluded licenses. But most SCA tools, especially the binary ones, they actually have three classifications: observed licenses, or what I think observed. Even Sonatype refers to this case as essentially what this is evidence of licenses. So if you wanted to provide the evidence to substantiate a concluded license, for example, this is actually the way to do it, right? So we actually theoretically support all three license types, which is, I think, something unique to SPDX, or something unique to CycloneDX. I don't believe SPDX does this. So we can describe the SPDX license identifier. We can describe the license expression that we found during our evidence. And obviously, if we specify the license itself, these are all of the, okay, I should probably make another note of this, Jan. What we should do for license, we should reference this, because this is going to be all duplication that we've already gone over. Can you make a note of that, please? Awesome. Thank you, man. So yeah, we can describe the license IDs, the license names, and again, this is all the licensing stuff that we've already kind of gone over, so I'm going to skip all this. But the general premise here is that this is just evidence. This is not assertion of a license. This is just, hey, I found this thing. Yep, lots to get rid of. Okay.
The performance of this meeting will be huge with all the pages you're skipping.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's all we've literally gone through all this already in a prior meeting. So there's no sense of revisiting.
I'm just worried that Samina will raise the requirements for the next meeting with the number of pages to go through.
Right. Okay.
I have full
okay,
confidence in you guys.
Thank you.
All right. So this is the end of the licensing support for the evidence anyway. And then here's evidence of copyrights. So again, this is not assertion of copyright. This is just the evidence that we've observed. And this is just an array of strings. Release notes. We were actually really surprised that there isn't a standard to represent release notes in a standardized way. If you look at GitHub or GitLab, nor changelog, exactly. And it was kind of really unfortunate. And we wanted to change that because a lot of cases, right, if you upgrade to a component, a lot of times what you're going to find is that there's usually a note or two about security in a release note. If you upgrade to the component, upgrade to this version, be sure to do X in your configuration, otherwise Y will happen, right? That's a very, very common thing. And being able
Backwards
to capture
incompatibilities. Yeah,
exactly.
exactly.
So it was
Okay.
really important for us to be able to capture the release notes in a machine readable way. So we're gonna.
That's a huge task too. Okay,
It is. It
I
is.
understand why, but
Well, we've got a couple large projects trying to do this today. We'll see if they're successful.
I mean, if we can influence GitHub and GitLab, we're on our way. But
I
exactly.
was going to say, has there been any conversation with folks who do the tooling that build change logs generally, in talking to them or shopping this structure with them?
No, not at all. This structure was actually I'll have to dig it up, but there's a there used to be they no longer exist, but there used to be a GitHub app that provided some of this, and it no longer exists.
I was going to say, there is a kind of built-in GitHub thing that does generate release notes for you. It may have turned
yeah,
in,
but it's all marked down and whatnot. Yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, if we can get it in a machine readable format, I mean, that would truly be ideal. But let's go through the.
I was gonna say, the way to get it into a machine readable format is to get it into a machine writable format. You know,
Right.
have people be able to have a tool that produces it, then you can have a tool that consumes it. I'd be happy to collect the tools that I'm aware of and try and like compare them to what we have here, if that's helpful at all.
Perfect.
super.
Yeah, I mean, this is part of the specification that I think is just not well known. Most people don't know that CycloneDX actually does this, or even the benefits of doing it, right? I mean, one of the things that is interesting to me is that, you know, if you look at commercial software, I mean, the open source stuff is one thing, but if you look at commercial software and how, you know, they all have different ways of writing release notes. Some of it's HTML, some of it's a Word doc or PDF. And if you're a consumer and you've got 10,000 vendors, well, I mean, they all use a different format, which is ridiculous. If I'm a security team and I care about security things in a release note, having all these different formats is not a strategy.
In the search of allies, I think we can talk with the dependabot people if anyone has any contact, because dependabot in GitHub really needs to know if there are any backward incompatibilities, so it has to force to stop and notify and say, hey, I'll open an issue here. There's something you guys need to do that I can't do automatically.
Yeah, the way Dependabot does it, I don't think is triggered on release notes. In the open source world, a lot of this comes down to like people boil the ocean, and it's about standardizing commit structures because you then build your release notes from the commit structures, which a lot of people, it's very difficult to get everyone to agree to something like this. But I can also, I know some folks on the Dependabot side, so I'm happy to roll them into the other like kind of release tooling folks I can talk to.
It would be cool, even if not everyone adopts conventional commits, which I imagine is what you were referring to, that
there's actually a couple different ones even.
Oh,
so, yeah, I know,
okay.
right?
Yeah, but still, they could be sources of data for this as well, right? And
yeah, I mean, one thing I definitely know is that we're seeing more tooling in this space that's not commit dependent, even from like a product standpoint, kind of what Steve was talking about from like a commercial standards standpoint. There's a whole bunch of SaaS companies now focused on how you can do product change logs. And so everyone I've ever talked to kind of wished that there was a standard structure, and I think it's really up to someone doing it. I don't know if CycloneDX will ultimately be that authority, but it'll be interesting to at least shop this one to see like how close we can get it to something people like.
Steve, please note that Matt has his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Matt.
Didn't want to interrupt anybody, but I mean, I've had this thought earlier in the call is that it's essential for connectivity for any solution, as been noted, to a GitHub or corresponding GitLab API, because what would trigger this would be a GitHub event, which would be a release tag being created. So a tag event cause these things. And I would want to mention that if you're using GitHub packages or software that support GitHub packages, which includes containers and other things, that you can also retrieve SigStore records from the transparency logs. So these all should be triggered via a release tag, not just the concept of a GitHub release, but there's actually an event that occurs that all tooling would use to derive this data and extract the data as a root event.
Got it.
But in the projects I've been working with, that would be the changelog. That's all a list of the commits and stuff. But the release notes is more freehand text. But I don't think there's any standard for separating the two. But
no, the release tag would be the root event that got you the data. If you look into a GitHub event data, that
for the changelog in my
all
world,
the linkage. Well, the changelog is a semantic term. As you pointed out, the tag will get you the commit records from the last release tag created. So you do a delta between release tags that get you a list of commits, and it does more than that. It actually gets you all the linking between pull requests and the commits, the pull requests, and the issues, and that gets you to the resolves thing. So if you use GitHub linkage through using fixes or resolves when you submit a pull request, you have the links to the actual issues. So you can bring the entire chain of stuff we've been talking about for the last half hour in through a single event. So anyway.
Hopefully the CVs that are fixed as well in a structured format.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem here, like I completely agree with what Matt said. The biggest problem here is actually just consistency of using those GitHub features, which is unfortunately not super present in the system,
exactly.
unfortunately.
Enforcement policy, so the problem is people don't use as fixes or resolves or other keywords to link issues to pull requests. But what's guaranteed though is that most releases can, if you create a release either through the UI or through the API, you will get it'll be tagged in some way. There'll be a release.
Every release has to have a tag. That's it's a one-to-one relationship on GitHub.
Right, so you won't necessarily get all the PR, you won't really get the commit to PR to issue linkage, because that's all upon the onus is upon the developer who submits the pull request to link it to the issue, right?
Yeah, what's really complicated is that unfortunately GitHub releases can have release notes and the repo can have a changelog per version, and that content is not always the same content.
No. And that's actually yeah, exactly. And I suffer this as well, is that there's a policy that should be one pull request should reflect one issue that addresses one problem and one set of code, but people won't get on a pull request and they fix 2 or 3 things. So the release notes, the text-based ones, the fix-ups, are supposed to meant to augment things that were known to be put in via one PR might have brought in 3 features. So to describe those extra things that were not apparent from just the titles of the pull requests or the titles of the issues, for example.
Yeah, totally. My sense here is that I think there's a ton of way we can get good data from this, and the way we can enforce stuff is using tooling as policy, right? Like if you make tools that make it easy to do the right thing, then you're going to get more consistent data in the system.
But this is all stuff in order to keep some structure of the meeting. This is stuff that goes back to the CycloneDX project, and in Ecma we have the text we have.
Yeah.
So it's really good ideas, but let's bring them back. And
all right, let's we are well over time, so great discussions. I didn't want to stop it, but we will pick up the release notes next week. So thank you all for participating. Appreciate the contributions. And I will post the doc with the 4 new sections in the TC54 channel. So please take a look at all 3 of those documents before next week if you can. And have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for the homework, Steve.
You're welcome. Anytime.
Have a great day.
Cheers.
Yeah, thank you,
You too.
everybody.
Too.
Bye.